All right. Well, I just want to begin by one, thanking Bob for calling on me to do this, and definitely get me outside of my comfort zone. Um, I have never done a lesson to a congregation like this before. Part of my background, similar to Bob, I worked in public safety. So I worked in fire and law enforcement for over 30 years. And in part of that, I was a training instructor, and I was a battalion chief. I was a leader when I finally retired. I did 12 years doing that. I was a fire captain for 5 years, had crews underneath me, and an engineer. But I started at the bottom. I started as a volunteer firefighter at the age of 17 years old, and then worked on my way up and retired at 50. And I'm very blessed for the opportunities and the things I learned through that. But as a father, I had a lot of struggles going through that. And I'm going to start off, before I get too far into this, I'm going to call Tim out because I was doing really good this morning. I'd been studying. I'd been working on this lesson on and off for the last week or so and trying to format it and put it together. And then we were having part of our lesson this morning in class. We were talking about family and how our congregation and our church is a family, and how there are many parts, but we all work together and we share the burdens of each other and we share the accomplishments of each other, and how much as a family here in this congregation, there's a feeling of love. And it's God's love. And it's the love that He had for us that we share together. And Tim called me out, and he got to me. And so those of you that are here regularly see that sometimes I get emotional when I speak. And like I had a talk with Bob a couple weeks ago, teaching and talking never used to get to me this way. It never did. I've done talks in front of hundreds of people. Part of what I did in the fire service, I was a public information officer, and I would go to these large fires throughout California, and I would put together these town hall meetings, these assemblies of thousands of people that were in the worst moment of their life. They were in midst of devastation, and I would be the calm voice that would orchestrate that meeting and keep it all together and be the reason and be the opportunity for them to get some understanding of what they were going through. So how I got to where I am today, where I break down when I speak, it's because the gospel is different to me now. Life, I'm in a different place than I was then. And it takes a whole new meaning as your children get older. And you not only see the impact of what you've done and what you do and how you live and how you've instructed them, but you see the example of how they start living their lives. And it becomes much more fulfilling, but it becomes much more personal. So I'm going to do my best to hold it together, to make it through this. And I now see that there's a clock. Okay, it's on the back wall. So Haley already said she was going to tap on her watch if I got too far along, because I have been known to be a little long-winded sometimes. So that's a little bit about me. And with doing this this is going to be the other thing, is I have a horrible time standing still. As I used to teach and instruct, I'm the kind of instructor that I walk around everywhere. I be involved in part of the room, and I usually always had PowerPoints where I just had talking points on the wall, and I just talk based on, and I instruct and teach based on just bullet points. And I can't do that and be filmed and speak in the mic. So bear with me if I move around too much. I already noticed I make the floor squeak. Part of that's, of course, being nervous because it's my first time up here doing this in front of everybody. But the other part of that is I feel restrained right now of not being able to move around. So just bear with me. But with having this topic of being a biblical father or being a father and leader in a family, I don't have all the answers. Nor have I lived out being the best example of what a father is. But I hope I can give you all something to think about as we go through this study. We don't automatically become good fathers. Is there anybody in the room that's automatically become a good father? I know the story of some of us, and I know I can speak for myself. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've done a lot of things wrong, and I'm very blessed that I had a good wife that kind of brought me back in line a few times. To be a good father, there's other elements to it. Just like in the fire service and like Tim was talking earlier about bull riding and in law enforcement and in almost every trade, we don't just decide to do something one day and become good at it, do we? No, it takes a lot of training. It takes perseverance. It takes knowledge. It takes learning. And it takes time and application and study. So there's a lot of work that goes into being successful. And Tim made the reference earlier talking about bull riding that kind of get halfway through it and forget what he was doing. Well, if that was the case, he was going to end up in the dirt. Because if he wasn't paying attention to what he was doing the whole time, he was going to get hurt. He was going to be lost. And that was something that I always trained the officers that I worked with and the firefighters that I worked with. And it goes back to this old saying, train how you fight and fight how you train. And the reason we looked at that is because we wanted what we did to be second nature. You don't have to think about it. When time got stressful, when things got dangerous, when times were tough, you didn't have to think about what you were doing. You did it enough, you had enough muscle memory that you could just act. And you always did it in a way that you were safe and that you protected others. Sometimes we took some risks, but we always, at the end of the day, the goal was always to come home. And so we always fought how we trained and trained how we fight. So I want to take that same thought and apply it to a family. Apply it to a father, apply it to a grandfather, apply it to a shepherd. Because anymore, we have to train how we're going to live our lives. And we have this book, the Bible, that gives us every essential component of every challenge we'll have in our life, but we just have to apply it. We have to read it, we have to learn it, and we have to understand it. And that's how we can apply it to make ourselves successful in this. So there's many active parts of our society and evil that are trying to tear apart a family every day. Would you guys agree with me on that? Absolutely. It's a huge challenge. So some good examples may be in our homes, but there's some good examples in our homes. It could be in the church. It could be other men in our lives. It could be the examples we have in the Bible of men in the Bible. And I'll go over some of the leaders that are referenced in the Bible in Hebrews 11. We can have mentors. It could be through our work and through our families. But as we study, as we've been studying the last few months, and especially going through the last couple of months through Luke 15, there's several lessons in there that we talked about. We talked about the lesson of the the parable of the Good Shepherd. And in that talks about how the shepherd has 100 sheep. But yet what they all know him, and he knows them by their voice. He protects them, he takes them out to pasture, he brings them in at night and keeps them safe. He leads them to water, and he watches over them. And in that parable, it talks about how one gets lost, and the shepherd calls for help to watch the rest of the flock, and he goes and looks for that one sheep. And he goes and finds them, and he brings them home. And at the end of the parable, it talks about how it's worth more in heaven to bring back the one lost than it was the 99 that were all that all stayed and were all faithful. And like Bob talked earlier, is we're all part of that one. None of us have lived our lives in a way that we've all been part of the flock forever. We've never been good. We've all fallen away. But we're very fortunate that we've had a shepherd that has looked out for us, that risked himself, risked his safety, risked his own life to go look for us and bring us back. In that same chapter, we had the story or the parable of the prodigal son. And that's another example that we have of a father's love. And in that example, the son, that father has several sons. And one son decides, you know what, Dad? I want to live. I want to leave home. Give me what is due to me. And I want to go out and live on my own. I want to be my own person. I want to leave the house. I want to go to college. I want to go out and experience life and see what there is for me. Do we kind of hear that as a societal norm these days? And so that father took and cashed out part of what he had, and he gave the portion of what was owed to that son that would have been his inheritance, gave it to him and said, go. I love you, son. Go. And so in that parable, the son goes off and he squanders it all. He's living life. He's having a good time. He gets rid and loses all of his money to a point where he's homeless. He's scrounging for food out of what he is feeding swine. And he gets to the lowest part of the low of his life. And he decides that, you know what? I can go home and ask to work for my dad, for my father, because his servants, those who work for him, eat better than I do. They have a better life than I do of what I've squandered away. And so, in that example there, the son comes back. He comes back, and the father accepts him with open arms. He takes the finest coat that he has and he puts it around him. He hugs him. He's so excited that the son that he had lost and had fallen away has come back, that he takes the fatted calf and they have a big barbecue. They have a big feast, and he celebrates the return of the lost son. And that's just another mirror of the love that God has for us as a shepherd and as the example in the sheep that he showed. And there gets to be more into that with that parable, but I don't, on the course of time, I don't want to go too deep into that. But that gives us the example that even as we fall away, God takes us back. He brings us back. He loves us enough. And we have that as an example of parents and as fathers that we should have for our own children. And that can be hard to do. So if we want to look at a process that it means to be a good father, a good family, a good parent. There's several components of it, but I'll begin with talking to the young men and the young women that are living their lives. Right now's the time to live your life to prepare for what's to come, to prepare for being a parent, to prepare for being a mother, a good mother, to prepare for being a good father. That was something as a kid, I don't remember that always happening. And I didn't have the best examples, but I've had some great mentors along the way. And I've been able to learn mostly through the Bible, along through having a very caring, loving wife that stands beside me, but also through the church. So one of the things, especially for young men, preparing yourself, young men need to be leaders. We have a deficiency in our society for young men to be leaders. To be leaders in the home, to be leaders at work, to be leaders in the church, to be leaders in their families. And because of that, we constantly have society tearing us apart. And we constantly have I want to say it's the flaming arrows coming at men that want to be leaders, because that's not what the world wants. The world wants every man to be meek and quiet and kind of second to everybody else. But that's not the place we're supposed to be a biblical father, or to be a leader in a home, to be a leader in the church as a shepherd, to be a good minister, to be able to talk to others. We have to be able to stand up and lead. And I'm going to go into some things about leading, but before I get into that, I do want to read a passage about that is very important, not only about leading, but about being a family, because it's the example that Christ gives us about a marriage. And this is one of the most integral thing about being a father and a leader and being a family, is you have to have a strong marriage. And I can speak from personal experience, because I haven't always had that. I made some huge mistakes when I was a young lad, and I've learned from those mistakes, and I've been very blessed for the opportunity to come out of that and to have the family that I have today. Because some of the mistakes that I had made and the ways I had lived my life and the things I had done, I wouldn't have the beautiful daughters I have today if I hadn't been pulled out of that. So I'm going to read from Ephesians chapter 5, starting with verse 22. And this is the example we have with marriages like Christ and the church. It says, "Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also wives ought to be to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, and that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands ought also love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. No one ever hated his own flesh, but nourished and cherished it, just as Christ also does the church. Because we are members of his body, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Now, if we use that as an example, God so loved us that he gave his only son. Now, as parents, would we be willing to give up our only child to be sacrificed for others? But we have that example that it's not only that Christ was for the church, but as husbands, we're to be that to our wives. We're to protect them. We're to guide them. We're to nourish them, just as we would do ourselves. And the same wives are supposed to be that same way to their husbands, to give that same love back. And I think it's so important when it talks about you bring a husband and you bring a wife, and together they become one flesh. We live in a world, in a society today that talks about you come together and each part has to give a little bit. And if you don't like the other, if something goes wrong, you can just walk away. But if we come together as one and unite ourselves as a marriage, and we think of it as the way Christ came for the church and the example that we have, it's a lot harder to give up because we understand the responsibility that we have as a couple to stay together. And this is just a great example of how much husbands and wives are to treat, love, respect, and protect each other, just as God loves the church, Christ loves the church. So another great example we have for fathers, and getting into the whole fatherly thing, is in Proverbs 4. So Proverbs 4 is a father's instruction. And I'll read through that quickly. It says, "Hear, O sons, the instruction of a father, and give attention that you may gain understanding. For I give you sound teaching. Do not abandon my instruction. When I was a son to my father, tender and the only son in the sight of my mother, then he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments, and live. Acquire wisdom, acquire understanding. Do not forget, nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will guard you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is acquiring wisdom. And with all your acquire, you get understanding. Prize her, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a garland of grace. She will present with a crown of beauty. So in that example there, I won't go through the entire chapter, but in that example there, it talks about how the husband's supposed to be to the wife. And in verses 10 through 12, it says, use wise guidance, for parents give children wisdom and uprightness, so that they can walk uprightly and avoid problems of sin. So as parents working together, that's our goal, is to teach our children, one, how to have wisdom, so we have to give them understanding. We have to teach them in the ways that they need to live. We need to teach them about what the world is around them. We need to prepare them for what's to come. We give them instruction and help them to understand the way that they can live their lives. The problem we have with society is many people today object the authority of a husband. They object of any authority. They don't believe that there's any authority within the church. They don't even believe that there's any authority by God as our Father that we're accountable to as Christians, but that there's even authority within the home. They take away the authority of husbands over their wives or even parents over their children because they claim leaders just want to honor and please themselves. But that's not what we're instructed to do. Parents and husbands are given authority not for their own will or convenience, but to teach, train, lead, direct, honor the will of God. So there's some things that we can do to be successful at this. We must trust and obey and have obedience towards God. We live out our trust and obedience towards God through faith. So let's look at some of the heroes of faith that we have in Hebrews 11. So one of the first ones we have in Hebrews 11, starting in verse 7, was Noah. When you think about faith, Noah led his family by preparing an ark by faith. He built it, not knowing how to do all that. He built it only by what God told him to do. But it was him living out his faith as an example to his family and instructing them, and that's how they were successful. Another example we have is Abraham. Abraham led his family to serve God in Genesis 18:19. He demonstrated faith when he left Ur to go to Canaan. And again, when he was tested, when he offered up his only son, Isaac, under God's instruction to be an offering. And we think about how precious our children are to us, but how much of a challenge that had to be and how much a demonstration of faith that would have to be to take your only son, to carry him, to take him up into the mountains, to put him on an altar, to present him as a sacrifice to God, because that's what he was instructed to do. And it was up until the point where Abraham was just about to do it that God said, wait, you've done what I've asked you to do, and over here in the thicket is a ram that you can take and put in the place of your son. And that's a total demonstration of faith. And then we have the example of Moses, who Moses refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, which at that time, that would be probably like being Trump's son, I guess, or being the son of a president or one of our leaders, that the title comes with prestige. But he didn't want that. He didn't want to be known as just the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He wanted to instead suffer with God's people. And it eventually led him out of slavery in Egypt. And he led the Israelite people through the Red Sea. And he did all this by faith. He didn't have a big sign telling us it didn't come across on the teleprompter telling us what to expect that day. He did it through faith, through God talking to him. And then the last example I'll use from this is Joshua. Joshua led Israel to conquer Canaan, including the defeat of Jericho by faith. And as kids, we all remember the story of Joshua fought the battle of Jericho and played the trumpets and the walls came tumbling down. But you think about that, that was a secured city. And back then the cities had walls and they had drawbridges and kind of what we remember that we reflect back of medieval times. But that's what cities had to stay secure. But God instructed Joshua, and knowing that they didn't have the army, they didn't have the force to overtake Jericho, they still listened to what God told them. He still lived out the faith that God gave him as an example, and then they were successful by listening to God. So in every one of these cases, faith required action. So it reminds me of faith without works is dead. And a lot of times that gets confused about, you have to earn your salvation. We have to live out our faith. We have to be the example to our children. We have to be the example within the church, within our congregations. We have to be the example of our faith throughout our communities, through people we work with. And that's how we can be successful, is trusting in God. So one of the key elements to that is prayer. So the greatest leader of all time was the Son of God, Jesus. And he lived his life praying. Jesus prayed alone at times. He prayed with his disciples. He prayed with his followers. He prayed for his followers. He prayed with them. He prayed for everybody else. He gave the example all the time of going alone, praying, and being guided. And that's a thing we can do as parents and as fathers. We need to pray. We need to be the example in our families. We need to include them in what we do. Another element we need to look at is love, patience, and self-sacrifice. Ephesians 5:25 and 28 through 30. Jesus' love is specifically an example for husbands. Jesus' leadership towards the church is based on love, self-sacrifice, so much that he died for the church. Husbands should love their wives as Jesus loved the church. No man has the right to just do whatever he wishes, making decisions without regard or without the well-being of his wife. To ignore her needs would be selfish, unloving, and sinful. This doesn't justify a wife to do the same. To be another element, and I see the time, so I'm rushing. I only have two other things to hit. Is teaching and instructions. And we have that as parents through Proverbs 6:20 and 22. So the child should keep his father's commandments and not forsake his mother's law. Parents must be teachers, teaching their children's needs to learn right from wrong, how to deal with life, how to treat others, how to face temptation, and how to accomplish God's work. The best way they can learn is by this instruction. And the best way to be a good instructor is to be a good example. Children need to be influenced by their parents' lives. In 2 Timothy 1:5, Timothy possessed faith, but it was first possessed by his mother and his grandmother. They didn't just tell Timothy what to believe, they showed him by their own faith. Actions speak louder than words. And that's where we need to live our lives, is through those actions. And in closing, I just one little tidbit is, there's always something that's talked about these days. It talks about a legacy and how, it's the legacy of what a family is or a legacy of what a man is. And so often our society and our culture looks at that as the prestige you have, what you own, how much money you have, how big your house is, how many cars you have, or how nice, or how many properties you own. And I like to think of it is that a legacy isn't any of that. Our legacy is not only our children, our families, but it's how we influence others to follow God's will. And I always, Kara and I were talking about this a little bit last night, is when I retired, I knew when I left, within months or years, people would no longer remember Chris Christopherson, battalion chief for CAL FIRE and a state peace officer and all the stuff I did. It wouldn't take long at all. I'm nothing but a blip in time anymore. But there's people I still keep in touch with, and people that I influenced their lives as their mentor, just as I was mentored. And people that it's not about what I said, but it was how I lived my life, how I influenced them, and how I taught them and helped instruct them to live a better life, to be good examples. And I was very fortunate at the end that I worked in a place where we had the opportunity to be able to talk to one another about God's word and to be a good example to one another. And that is the best thing we can do as Christians, is our legacy, is spread God's word, show God's love, be the examples of our children, and help give them the tools that they need, not only to grow and be good citizens of this world, but also continue to grow and be good examples to others around us. So that's the lesson I have, and I thank you all for bearing with me for my first time through this, and I hope that the words that I've shared with you will be able to enlighten all of you. And I ask you to stand and sing. If you have any needs, let us know as we sing our closing song.